Welcome to Psych Incubator's Eminent Psychotherapists Revealed. Tonight, we are pleased to feature Dr. Declan Aherne, who is a registered clinical psychologist and a counseling psychologist with the Psychological Society of Ireland. Declan is a fully trained Gestalt therapist, having graduated from the Irish Gestalt Center in 1992, and is a registered psychologist specializing in psychotherapy through the European Federation of Psychological Associates. He has been a registered sports psychologist with the Irish Sports Council. He is the founding chairperson of the Division of Psychotherapy with PSI. Declan has been working in the Midwest of Ireland for the past 38 years, both in private practice and also as head of counseling at the University of Limerick, from which he is now retired. Declan is director of Oakwood Psychological Services, which is the largest private practice of its type in Ireland, seeing up to 700 people per week with 60 clinicians on the team. He is also clinical director of the Family Wellbeing Center at Corpus Christi Primary School, Moyross, Limerick. Declan has published and presented both nationally and internationally on a variety of topics and has a special interest in the importance of a psychologically based primary care mental health service. Declan, thank you so much for being here tonight. We are so excited to talk to you.
Yes.
My pleasure to
And
be
you
here.
did, excuse me. I was amazed at how much you could get out on one breath, Elizabeth. That was incredible. So, Declan, I'd love to hear something about what you're doing now and when you therapeutically, if you're doing any, or the last time you were doing it, and how you got to that spot.
Sure, Michael. I was saying to you guys earlier, I'm 6 years retired from the University of Limerick, and one would think in being retired that I should have loads of time to do lots of things that I wasn't able to do when I was working. But my time has been swallowed up by all sorts of interesting things that I'm involved in. I guess the difference now is that I'm able to select out what I spend my time at, and that includes having time to spend with my 6 grandchildren, which is a wonderful privilege and something that we as parents 40 years ago or 35 years ago probably were just merely surviving as we tried to bring up our children, whereas now you can sit back and enjoy grandchildren all the more. So I had a beautiful walk on the beach today with my 1.5-year-old granddaughter Ren, and so that's one of the things I'm doing. If I was to run through some of the other activities, and we're in the down season now, so I'm out on the coast, the west coast in Kerry in Ireland, relaxing by the seaside. But my activities have centered on a number of projects, Michael. The one that I'm probably most privileged to be involved in is part of a family resource team. I'm clinical director in a primary school in one of the most disadvantaged areas in the whole of Ireland, in the city of Limerick. And it's quite a unique project that was set up. I've been involved for the last 10 years with them. So I spend a day a week at that school, supervising psychotherapists, as well as meeting with parents and having overall clinical kind of governance for this project, which is a new project. In primary school in Ireland, we don't have mental health facilities on site. In this project, we have now secured sufficient funding that we've been able to build a family resource center on the school site. And we have 5 therapy rooms, a group room, and 5 or 6 staff involved working there, as well as my trainee psychotherapists. And in that environment, it's interesting. What I've learned working in that environment is that we have to reinvent almost redefine what psychotherapy is about, because I think as psychotherapists, maybe we have a very privileged position in terms of looking at ideally how to deliver psychotherapy in the comfortable private sector of suburbia and upper middle class. Delivering psychotherapy in a working class deprived area of inner city Limerick in Ireland, it's a very different challenge. And what I've learned for myself and what I try to inculcate in our team is the importance of meeting people where they're at rather than where we would want them to be at. And that's really, really important. So we used to have this image when I started out way back along the principal at the school. We used to talk about, having people at the bottom rung of a ladder trying to climb the ladder to get due to poverty of aspiration. Whereas what we've learned is that the people that we're dealing with are actually a long way off even being at the ladder. They're so far removed from feeling that they deserve to be listened to, or they have value, or that they can trust people, like any professional person. So that's a hugely exciting place to be involved in, and I am hugely privileged to be a part of that project. And it gives me a raison d'etre for getting up on a Wednesday morning and having something to do that I feel is worthwhile, and working with an incredibly motivated and team of people who give of their time and give of their compassion willingly to work with people who are on the margins. And the people in this community are the most wonderful people you could meet.
So, Declan, can you tell us about like a case that your team finds incredibly challenging, and how you engage them, because it sounds like that's what you're really good at. Just give us some example.
The hardest part, I suppose, Jeffrey, and it applies to so many of the people, is actually using the term you use about engaging, making the contact, that people feel comfortable to come to see us. And so that's been our biggest difficulty, is that people would trust you to come. So basically what we have here is a community of people living in a very traumatic environment. They've been living through trauma where there have been many killings, murders. There's a lot of drug addiction, drug dealing, all sorts.
Is this multi-generational trauma?
Multi-generational, going back over the years. So we're ending up with children of children of children who've been living in this environment.
And any of this have to do with the Troubles?
No. Not the Troubles as you would know them, but those of us in Limerick would know of the Troubles that happened in Limerick going back 20 years ago, where we had a lot of feuding and gang warfare. So a lot of that has left its mark, and dealing with people who are
traumatized.
So coming back to your question, then the biggest challenge is actually being able to find a way of connecting with people that may not necessarily be psychotherapy in your term, textbook psychotherapy. This is what I was referring to at the start. So it may be a matter of, for example, for me, going to visit somebody in a house and sitting down with them in the house and chatting to them, introduced to them by the homeschool liaison officer of the school, so that they begin to see me as just another human being, ordinary person, not to be intimidated by them. So I would go up to the house and sit down in the front room and have a chat and have a discussion to enable them to build up confidence that they could come back and begin to meet with us.
Do you have tea?
Pardon?
You have tea with them?
If I'm offered, I certainly am offered tea, and will be offered. We'll just have a chat. We won't have therapy. All we're trying to do is get back to the basics of what ultimately is therapy is about. It's about building a relationship. And so for all of us, it's about, not making the assumption that relationship is going to be developed from the outset the way it might be in its traditional clinical setting. That it takes a lot of letting down barriers, breaking some of the traditional rules. For example, we have people coming to us who may not turn up for 2 or 3 sessions. And in normal circumstances, in our public service, those people will be written to and told, I see you didn't attend your appointment. We assume you're no longer interested in attending the service.
Interesting.
We'll take you off our list.
In
our situation, we leave the door open so we have clients coming back to us time after time because they struggle to come to us on a weekly basis. It's not like it might make sense to you or me because we've been trained in 1 hour therapy every Monday morning at 10 o'clock. But for somebody living in chaos, that's not feasible. It's not a reality, and it's not something that they're able to connect with. So we have to adapt. So just we have what's called here adaptive PE. So adapting PE programs for people with physical disability. We also have to adaptive psychotherapy for people who don't fit into the normal psychotherapy structure. And that's literally meeting people where they're at rather than where we're at. So we're doing that constantly, Jeffrey, trying to find ways of engaging. And what we've done over the time that the new building has opened now, that's 3 years open, is we've slowly built up a profile whereby people are now coming to talk to us in numbers, whereas initially it was difficult for them to come. And we have our most effective intervention probably is what we call the at the gate syndrome, or the at the gate protocol, which is engaging with parents when they come with their children at the gate of the school, going out, meeting them on the street and talking to them there. And now they're beginning to ask more and more questions of what's delivered in the service. So last year we met all of the parents of 3 of the different years of the school. All of the parents came in for small group meetings with us to see what we were doing with their children around mindfulness, because we have a mindfulness project as part of the project, and we bring the kids in. They see some of the mindfulness practice going on together with the children. Then the children go back to the classroom, and we might have a half a dozen parents, and we'd sit and talk to them about the other work that goes on at the family center. And gradually then they get curious, they begin to trust us, and they're beginning to come back now. So we're offering probably at the moment, I have 7 psychotherapists in training on the team, and they're probably 25 to 30 sessions a week being provided by those people.
Wow. And would you call this community psychology? Is that the model?
Very much community psychology. You know, it's
we don't talk about that very much anymore, but that used to be the word, I think, for the description of what you're doing, where you're engaging in the community, the ecosystem of the community in a way that
what we're building, what we've built our way of working is around. We have a theoretical framework, which I want to mention to you, which probably isn't quite well maybe known or heard about our side of the Atlantic, but the British Psychological Society Clinical Division developed what's called the Power Threat Meaning Framework. Have you heard of it?
Say that again. Slowly.
Power Threat Meaning Framework. Simply the PTMF. Okay. There's plenty of documentation on it, and I would really invite all of your listeners to look it up, because I refer to it as the greatest single contribution that psychology has given to mental health in the last 50 years. It's simply an alternative to the DSM. And it goes from, instead of diagnosing people with all sorts of psychiatric disorders, which are quite spurious at the best of times, and new ones are being invented every week. Instead of asking people what's wrong with them, we use what actually Oprah Winfrey did with Bruce Perry in their book. We ask, what happened to you?
Oh, great.
And that underpins the PTMF. What happened to you?
And can you just do a little plug for that book? Because that's such a good book.
Yeah, the Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. Yeah, it's a book called What Happened? What Happened to You? And, Oprah gives quite a good description.
So it's a collaboration between Bruce Perry, who's a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, and Oprah, who's very into mental health. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And
it's a dialogue between the two of them, but ultimately it's getting at the importance of hearing people's stories, the narrative of what happens to people. So if you can imagine working in a community like we work in, that question is so important. What happened to you? And when you hear the stories of the people's lives and what they've had to live through, then it makes complete sense as to how they've had to deal with their life. Develop survival mechanisms. Create what we call in Gestalt therapy creative adjustments, which are just the long term, but in the short term, they're a means of survival. So the Power Threat Meaning Framework is the core framework that underpins our approach to working in the community. It's a community-based approach that looks at empowering people in an impoverished environment, how to realize that they have a voice and how they can.
Can you say how it, unpack it for us a bit? What's it?
Well, I mean, the simplest way is by making things like psychotherapy more accessible to people so they can come in and tell their story. and make that story feel valued. But in a more communal way, I have been to the city council and made a presentation on the power threat meaning framework so that they can understand that labeling people with psychiatric labels does not in any way bring about any social change. They, you know, and again, Jeffrey, you know my history in this. Psychiatry and medicine does not see itself as agents of social change. They are in the business of maintaining the status quo. There's nothing about psychiatry that is aimed at trying to bring about some social change in terms of how power is distributed within any community. And I'm not criticizing them for that. I'm just saying that that's what they do, and they do it very well. But it doesn't bring about the necessary change. And we know that things like poverty undermine or underpin so much of our mental health problems that until we learn as a society ways and means of addressing poverty, we're never going to get to deal with the issues of mental health.
So this sounds a little bit like what Thomas Szasz, I think it was, talked about the myth of mental illness and how, I mean, it sounds like it has some roots in that movement.
Probably. I mean, you know, that again was a seminal piece of work going back probably 50 years ago at least. And I think we've moved probably a long way from that. The power threat meaning framework is actually more built around the constructivist, kind of a social constructivist approach, the kind of constructivist outlook that basically was the basis of kind of formulation in psychology. The whole idea of formulation that was really integral to how psychologists go about doing their business. So instead of trying to find out people's, do you have schizophrenia or do you have this disorder?
Okay, so pretend I'm in third grade, which sometimes I act like. Then I'm in third grade, and explain the terms again. Power, just very third grade.
So the idea is that power, that we're asking the question, when we ask the question, what happens to you?
Okay, that's about power.
We're asking, what role has power had in your life? Okay. And for people with mental health problems, that generally is a negative experience of power by being disempowered and by other people having power over you.
Marginalized, disenfranchised.
Exactly. And that can be in all sorts of ways, financial and monetary, but also just in social discrimination, all sorts of ways. For example, somebody in our community would, if they applied for a job with an address where we are based, they would automatically be not listed for an interview because, well, you come from that side of town. So there's no way you could have that type of mentality, that type of mindset. So the threat posed by power is a threat to my self-worth, my self-validation. And so what I've had to do then is create what meaning have I made? And this is where the constructivist part comes in. What meaning have I had to make to survive in terms of the threat? So one of the ways is of me trying to feel good about myself is to create my own identity within that community. By example, selling drugs. Maybe that now I get a sense of self-worth and self-validation within the community because that's the only thing that we can hope to achieve in that community. So it's about being able to see how people have created meaning because that's what they need. We all have to find meaning that makes life livable. And when you're living in chaos and living in trauma, then the type of meaning you discover is one that makes you feel that you belong in a community at least. And that has to be revisited. And so the whole purpose of our therapeutic approach and the beauty of the power threat meaning framework is that it applies to all modalities of psychotherapy. It's not a modality in itself. It's an umbrella framework that can apply no matter what modality. It doesn't matter. The whole point is that you're trying to unravel and unpack a lot of the threats and the ways in which power has put people down and helping people find their voice so they can be empowered to take charge of their lives.
So it's really powerful, really powerful. So the patient or the person who's got a problem, who's being told you've got a problem, go do something, or the school calls you in or something, is labeling you and saying this one's the worst of the worst or the sickest of the sickest, and that's got nothing of value in it.
Exactly.
Except, and what you have to do is somehow find a way of gaining their trust and then helping them find new ways of feeling good, feeling worthwhile, feeling loved, feeling
And
cared about.
to empower themselves to realize that they can break out of that. That doesn't have to be like we have. Again, if you've worked in impoverished communities, you will know that the people have this poverty of aspiration. So for a lot of our community, the objective of being on the unemployment register is something almost be desired and seen as the ultimate achievement. Is that I'm on social welfare and I'll get social welfare payments, because I don't see beyond that society is not going to allow me to progress any further than that. So now we've got to create a different mindset that helps people to understand that, of course, you can. We've had the most wonderful book written recently by Katrina O'Sullivan. I don't know if you've heard of this, called Poor. And Katrina is somebody who grew up in a community like ours. She is of Irish origin, but grew up in England, and wrote her book about growing up with parents who were alcoholics and drug addicts, and she herself became one. But ultimately broke through the barrier and ended up with a PhD in psychology from Trinity College, the illustrious Trinity College in Dublin, simply because she stuck with it, and she had one good adult. Are you familiar with that term that we use an awful lot nowadays, the one good adult in her life? Somebody who gave her a sense of self-belief, and it helped her. So the Katrina O'Sullivan story is a prime example of that. We have another wonderful book by a guy called Keith Earls, who's an international rugby player here in Ireland, who grew up in this community. He wrote his autobiography, and it's a full description of what it's like, what happened to him, and how he grew up in this community. But again, he found a way of breaking through the barrier and coming out of it, and it's giving that hope to people living in those communities that everybody can break through the barrier, because it's not written in law, it's not written in stone, it's just maintained by a society that needs to have people. We talk about the poverty industry. We need a poverty industry because that keeps lots of people in jobs. It doesn't necessarily cure poverty. It just keeps people.
How do you mean it keeps people in jobs?
Well, somebody's got to help these people.
Lots of people who are employed to address the poverty issue. But for them to hold on to their jobs, one thing for sure is that they mustn't get rid of the poverty, because they'll have no jobs if they do that. So that can never be the agenda. So we have to be very careful when we're engaging in this kind of work, that we don't patronize people who are living in these dire circumstances and without empowering them. We need to empower people and realize that we're all equal, and somebody who ended up on the wrong side of the tracks didn't go there because they wanted to go there, but it was foisted upon them in a society where there's a gross inequality, and you relate to that in your side of the Atlantic as well.
Well, what do you do with a patient who comes in and has been labeled addicted or alcoholic or something, and this is just something that's everywhere, and yet it's like, what are they going to do? Go to AA? It's.
Yeah, see, the point, Michael, is that in our service and our therapists, and the interesting thing is our therapists are therapists in training. So I supervise 7 therapists in training. Now, 3 of them are interns. They're finished their training and they've stayed on in the project to work up their hours for accreditation. Their job, week in, week out, and they've been seeing people for 2 and 3 years, some of them. That the people who are attending them, they are being given a message that somebody cares about me. Okay, so we don't provide an addiction service. We don't run an AA service. That's available as well. Psychotherapy is not about dealing with the addiction. It's about dealing with the underlying issues that are behind the addiction. So we will engage them in an AA program if possible, if necessary. But the psychotherapy work is about, with compassion, making people heal through loving kindness. Now, this is where I suppose a lot of my thoughts are, and what I wanted to share with you a lot about in terms of psychotherapy, if you will bear with me, is that something that we don't talk enough about in psychotherapy, and that is the whole art of loving. I've only recently finishing Eric Fromm's book on the art of loving. I don't know if this book should be on every single training program, because that's what psychotherapy is about.
Can you summarize what like the basic premises are in The Art of Loving by Fromm?
Fromm's book is absolutely, and it's not a big book. There's less than 100 pages.
Yep.
So the message in it, he talks, for example, he talks about the importance of self-love and how he distinguishes that from selfishness. He's very much, I mean, even though he's a psychoanalyst, he's written also a book on Zen, I believe, and there's an awful lot of Buddhist kind of principles in what he's talking about. The whole notion of unity and togetherness, so that his idea of loving is very much akin to my own, which is kind of using the description of St. Paul about loving. Love is patient and kind, and all that St. Paul describes it as opposed to being in love with somebody. So he makes a clear distinction between things like erotic love and even motherly love. He looks at the kind of notion of loving as being able to love others as you love yourself. And that was a quote that I used to get from a trainer of mine way back when I was a student. He used to regularly quote the idea, love others as you love yourself. And we always found that, particularly here in Catholic Ireland, we were always brought up with the idea that, you mustn't be thinking good of yourself now, you must be thinking of everybody else. But Fromm makes the quote and makes the point that how can you love others if you don't know how to love yourself? So you have to be, now, how are you going to love yourself if you've spent 30 years being used and abused by society? So the loving relationship is what happens in psychotherapy. Courtney Young has written a fabulous article on loving in a relationship, and he refers to the Anam Cara of John O'Donoghue, another brilliant book written by an Irish guy, a theologian, The Importance of Loving. And I suppose the person that I related to goes way back. I was mentioning to you guys that I had the honor and the privilege many years ago of attending a Carl Rogers encounter group here in Dublin, national encounter groups, and we were young psychology students at the time, and we were given an audience. It's like an audience with the Pope. We were all given there was maybe 20 or 30 of us members of the Psychological Society of Ireland, and we were given an opportunity to sit to talk to Carl Rogers, which of course was mind-blowing for us, as a student. And the question I asked Carl Rogers in that session was, taking your three conditions of a healing relationship: congruence, positive, unconditional positive regard, and empathy. I said, really, are you talking about loving? Are you talking about having a loving relationship? And he said, yes, that's what it is. So if we go back to the basics of what we're trying to teach in psychotherapy, we don't hear enough about, actually, it's about learning how to love. And it's not something that, the issue is that it's not something that's scientifically proven, you see, so, because it can never be. And my fear then, of course, is that, that we get to the stage of science deciding to hijack it. And so then you get to the point where you'll have people saying, well, if you could prove to me that love works through scientific evidence, then I'll do a bit of loving.
Right.
So then you miss the whole point, because it's not about that. It's about being able to be open-hearted. And, and in fairness to Buddhist psychology and the whole mindfulness movement has really led the way in a lot of this opening compassion. But that's what our work is about. And think back
but I do think there is somewhat of a robust literature on the core conditions account for a large part of the variance in terms of outcome. So there's Bruce Wampold and a lot of other people have done work on the therapeutic attributes and patient-therapist matches and so forth. But one thing I wanted to bring into discussion and get your take on is, I've been very disturbed lately when a colleague sent me a series of articles that reports about 40% of therapists actually do harm.
40?
40, yes. About 40% of psychotherapists that were in a pretty large cohorts do harm.
make it worse.
What's your take on that, Declan?
That's quite frightening, isn't it? And I mean, I don't know whether that would apply in Europe as well as in the States. Probably would, but and I can remember reading articles regarding that. I can remember some of those studies going back a number of years.
Yeah.
I suppose I see it. I'm on the board of directors of the Gestalt Institute of Ireland, so I suppose I have governance responsibility in terms of the quality of training that we provide to psychotherapists here in that particular discipline. And I do see it as being hugely important. I've been dealing with trainee psychotherapists for a long time, and I've seen the caliber of people that are coming through. And the criteria I've always used in selection of candidates for training placements has been a phrase that myself and my good colleague Michael Aherne refer to as, we're looking for good people. People, we're not looking for people who are on some sort of an ego trip or some sort of a kind of, look how great I am as a psychotherapist. We're looking for really decent people who are willing to be open-hearted with their clients. Unless we have done our own personal therapy work, of course there's going to be damage done. And that's the importance, I suppose, the privilege and the huge importance of psychotherapy training is the most valuable kind of module, and all of that training has to be your own personal therapy work, so that look at their blind, look at how they might be possibly doing.
You make you wonderful points, and you can tie this together. I think if the therapists are only going to be good therapists and do good, helping people feel loved if they feel loved. So, so how do you get that message across to therapists that they need to?
I know. Well, this is what I'm. Yeah, I mean, Michael. I mean, it's part of my I was referring that to my own up and coming book that leads into this and has borrowed a lot from all the different disciplines. But what I am saying in that book, and what Eric Fromm says at the end of his book, where he talks about the practice of loving, is that let's not be afraid to call. Jeffrey referred to the 3 core conditions, but Rogers never referred to it, as this is a module on loving. He talked about, because we had to make it sound as if it was scientific. So and loving sounds a bit kind of touchy-feely.
Not scientific.
How can we have a degree in loving? It's a very, and so this is where science and spirituality actually have to work hand in hand, and one must not negate the other. So because I think a lot of the loving I'm talking about is of a spiritual dimension. It's not of a scientific dimension.
Well, you could say it's a physiologic state. Loving, you have, if it's someone who a new client, or it could be a baby, or it could be a young kid, or you're the 1.5-year-old granddaughter, and you're going down the beach, and you feel these wonderful, loving feelings. And
Eric Fromm would say, and I would agree with him, loving isn't a feeling. Loving is an action. You can feel that lovely warmth. Of course, I mean, I'm in love with my wife, and we've been together for 40 years. That's a different thing. Loving is an action, and I'm quite clear about that. We can all talk about "I love you" and say the word love an awful lot, but unless you step up to the plate,
but your action is that you're spending time with a child, and the child is in love with you because you're this wonderful person who shows them fish and things on the beach and shells.
Yes.
And it's like, or it's, if you're learning child psychotherapy, I remember since I wasn't going into it, I was assigned the kid, and the people who are going to be child therapists work with the parents. So we go out and shoot hoops. This was this kid from a poor neighborhood. And years later, I was in an airport, and this kid runs up to me, and I don't know who it is, and identifies himself and says, "Remember we were shooting basketballs?" And I said, "Yeah, that was great." But that was you begin to act with them in a way that's natural and very caring, and that's
and very loving.
and it's and you get love back. It's
Here, but Declan, you're saying it's not not feeling the
Or it
feeling.
can be a feeling, but this situation we're talking about loving as action.
you have to show the love, not just
Yes.
have it.
No, I agree with that.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So I'm curious about this loving, what we're teaching our patients and our clients, and we're modeling it to them, we're showing them that we care, that we're listening, all of that. What is the connection with some mindfulness practices, or is there a connection there?
Well, that's
I
a
know your
really
take on that.
I'm so delighted you asked me that, Lizzie, because I've had some in my reflections on this whole area. I was drawing on different bits of material. I've mentioned to the Carl Rogers experience. Another one I had was with my mother at 92, shortly before she died. I asked her, "What has been the lesson that you want to teach me? What's been the most important thing you've learned in your life?" And she said, and she has no background in psychology whatsoever, but she just said loving. Right. So that was my wife. But the person who answered your question for me was that was my mother, but was my own wife, Jo, who has a master's in mindfulness. And I said to her one day, I said, "Jo, I get all the mindfulness stuff and I'm big into it, and I do my meditation, I do my yoga." I said, "But I'm trying to make the link. What's the link between that and the loving then? Like, I mean, do I have to be mindful to be loving? Do you see?"
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is what you're asking. And Jo, in her wisdom, without even stopping to catch her breath, said, she said, "Mindfulness is what brings you into that space to be able to do that."
I
Okay.
love
So
that.
in other words, you can't be loving. Somebody who's mindful is putting them into a space to be able to love. Because what gets in the way of mindfulness are all the interruptions. They're all the judgments, all the not accepting, all the striving, all the struggles that we have, all the hanging on to stuff. That's what stops us from loving. And of course, mindfulness teaches us to let go, to be accepting, to just not judge. So those are the principles. And that's why Buddhist psychology is talking about the same thing, no more than Christianity is talking about the same thing. And so I have a huge, again, Jeffrey will know this about me. I mean, I have a huge yearning for the connection between psychology and spirituality, because I feel that they are so closely linked, and that I think we try to be so scientific that we try to make them separate, but they can't be separate, because as human beings, we can't be separated. We can't break ourselves into these different parts. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
I
Jo
love
answered
that. Yes, that answers it so well. Yeah. Thank you. I'm also curious about, well, I have the floor, your work as a sports psychologist. I was a Division I swimmer, and looking back, it would have been so beneficial for not just my swim career, but for my own sanity to have worked with someone and had someone to talk about my swimming career. So I just want to know, like, what were or have been like the primary issues that you encountered, and is this loving a big piece of that too? I'm so curious.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a sports person, so even though I'm a clinical psychologist, sports has been part of my life. And I was very fortunate maybe 20 years ago to be I was involved with you don't play much rugby in America, but there's some rugby, but that's the sport that I've been involved in. And I was involved in my local rugby club, and I was doing sports psychology with them. And then I was fortunate enough to be invited by the coach of our provincial team to take on the provincial team. And I did that for 3 years. And during that 3 years, we won the European Championship twice.
Wow.
So they haven't won it since. So my claim to fame is that the sports
That's
psychologist They needed a sports psychologist to get him to win a European Cup.
That's science right there.
It was love. It was all love.
It was love.
Well, the work that we did, in fairness, what I would have brought to, I think, I'm not saying that I was the only person, but I certainly pioneered a lot of mindfulness work in sport. I think I influenced in some way my son, who's also a clinical psychologist, Cian, but he did a study. Jeffrey has met Cian, in fact. He did a study as an undergrad for his thesis on mindfulness in sport. And it's probably one of the first papers published, which you normally don't get published, an undergrad thesis, as you know, on the effectiveness of mindfulness in sport. So, Cian and myself, I think, would have been great advocates of and had a great interest in the benefits of mindfulness, because mindfulness is very, very like the idea of flow, that kind of flow experience that we talk about in sport. I did have the elite swim team from the University of Limerick that had all the international swimmers. I had them for 3 years as well. So I did quite a lot of work with swimmers, golfers, and as I said, rugby teams, and lots of other different sports. But what I was doing with them were what we call the 3 C's: concentration, confidence, and calmness. The basic principles that come into psychology in clinical practice can be transferred very easily. Also, obviously, we were doing a lot of teamwork, like any good clinician. My first step with the professional rugby team was to do an assessment to identify, have we any problems? Because if we've no problems, then there's no need for me to be fixing anything. What were the problems? And we addressed some of the problems that were there. But to this day, I've made, and this is nearly 20 years later, I've maintained good contact with a small cohort of those players who really took to it. So sports psychology doesn't always appeal to everybody. It's become much more popular here in Ireland over the last 20 years, particularly in our national sport in hurling. You see an awful lot of reference to sports psychologists having an impact. So it certainly has taken off, but I was doing it 20 years ago as a kind of a hobby, because it was a relief from my clinical work. And certainly mindfulness was ultimately what I was using as the basic focusing strategy, building calmness, concentration, and confidence into the one practice.
Declan, you mentioned flow, which Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book about many years ago that I think was very influential. Do you experience flow when you're in a therapeutic relationship sometimes?
I think I would hope that most of my therapeutic work is in the flow.
Can you say a little bit about what that's like for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're in the therapeutic situation that you're involved, I mean, it's like the Martin Buber I thou space. It's like you're so in there, that you're the moment you stop being in that space, I think your therapy is not happening. I mean, there may be some bracketing going on. There may be some kind of clinical kind of voice up there, kind of informing you. But all of the time during when you're present with your client, if you're being fully present, then I think that's the flow. You're in that space. And I mean, for me, the noticeable times are when the hairs begin to stand up on my neck, and I can feel something really significant has happened, a key kind of eureka moment in therapy. But I'm hoping that all of the whole hour session with each client, that I'm actually being fully present. And for me, using that term flow, I mean, I haven't seen it in the literature on psychotherapy, but for me, it's about being fully present with your client.
Engaged and present.
Pardon?
Engaged and present.
Making contact.
Yes. So one of the things that you probably know that I do is sometimes I do extended sessions. So I'll do sometimes a 90-minute and then take a break and do another 90-minute session with a person. And what I find often happens is that time passes so quickly. It's sometimes I think, oh, this is going to be really long. Spend 2 90-minute sessions with one person, or sometimes even longer. But what I find is that when I'm engaged in the process, the time goes by, I lose track of time, and it's. Did you experience that sometimes?
I think the opposite sometimes. I can recall for myself, but also for my trainees, is where you get a trainee or a psychotherapist or even myself getting bored in a session.
Oh yeah,
Where
time
that's
slows down.
happened.
Yeah.
So now you need to see where is the flow and
Right,
what's
but
happening.
isn't that because the engagement has been disrupted or not
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's but it's something that warrants your attention. I mean,
Yes.
being bored in a therapeutic context there's something happening,
Yes.
and it's really important to look at that and how to enliven it. And it's not the client's job to get you enlivened. It's the therapist's job to look at how they get enlivened, and that's through being present, making contact, and engagement.
So what are some of the techniques for kind of assessing whether there's engagement occurring? Um, I don't mean, do X, Y, or Z, but I'm curious. You're talking about your things on your neck, or you might be
Yeah,
feeling
I think
responsive.
it is very much, for me at least, again going back to my kind of my mindfulness informed therapeutic practice, would be just paying attention, noticing at any point in time, what am I feeling right now, what am I aware of, what am I sensing, what am I thinking at any point in time. You're using that and constantly, and with my trainees, I would always ask them, I would always say to them, it's not about, again, trainee therapists are forever feeling that they need to fill the gap of silence with saying something. They're always needing to say something. I'm saying to them, look, being silent actually is powerful, but just notice what's going on for you. And if you're going to make any intervention, be very clear as to why did I say that, or what's that intervention about? So that you're not just speaking as a kind of a social engagement kind of activity because you have something to say, but there's actually something behind what you're saying or what you're not saying, which is really valuable. So for me, it's about just paying attention, being in the here and now, paying attention.
So if I'm your client and you're doing all those things, and I'm wounded so that I don't want to make any contact because it's just going to be a failure because it's always a failure. Um, how would you begin to approach that?
My initial response would be, to me, if I'm doing my therapeutic work, I'm clearly checking with the client. I wonder what's happening for you now. What are you? So I was talking about myself, about being aware of what's going on for me, but I'm also checking with my client. What are you aware of right now? What's this like for you? What's it like for you to be here with me? How are you experiencing me at this moment? So all of the time, I'm trying to build that connection, because the client can now say, well, I feel as if you're not. I don't feel as if you're listening to me, or I don't feel as if you understand me. Okay, so let's talk about that. What would give you the impression I'm not understanding, or what is it you'd like me to understand? It's a way in of making that connection. So it's checking, it's my own self-awareness, but also checking with the client, what's your awareness right now? What's going on for you? Even in the silence, I will interrupt the silence after a minute or two and say, what's happening now? Just notice what's going on and sit with that for a while. I don't know if that answers your question, Michael, but that's the kind of
Oh,
way,
no, that
dialogue.
was a great answer.
Yeah,
And that goes a
dialogue.
long way. You know, it's very difficult sometimes to get past that spot with people who have been really through a hell.
Absolutely. And they have every right to be the way, they're entitled to be where they're at. So my job is to see, the biggest, the most kind of significant movement for me in therapy for my client is when they acknowledge to me, that they say something like, that's exactly it. So for me, it's about meaning making. Meaning making has been a cornerstone of all of my work.
But you're talking about attunement there, aren't you? That's more like attunement.
It's attunement, but it's also the attunement can be at different levels. For me, the meaning making part with the client is that I've been able to make sense of what they're doing for myself and for them. So that's what, and I've been able to share that with them. So they're able to say to me, yeah, that's exactly how it is. So now we know we're both on the one channel. I know that I've made sense for them using my language in a way that makes sense for me as well.
How is that making meaning though? Like I get the attunement part, but how is that
So
making meaning?
So if the simplest way is if somebody tells me what happened to them as a child, that their father, physically used to hit them, and I might say to them, so my sense is you might be quite angry about that, and they'll say, "You're goddamn right, I'm angry about it." So now I've simply being empathic with somebody and sharing with them, and they acknowledge that. Well, now, you're now saying that you're now validating what they're experiencing, and they're agreeing with you.
Yes.
So that to me is how you're making that connection. And for me, the client needs to know that the person they're with understands them.
Yes.
Okay, that we're not some sort of some pie in the sky kind of clinical person out there that's observing them and trying to solve their problem, but are trying to cure them, but that we're engaging with them in a healing relationship, that the relationship is doing the healing. I'm not doing the healing. It's our relationship is doing the healing for both of us.
Well, you're actually, I mean, the way I would look at it is you're activating their internal healing forces. You're opening up their own internal resources that have been blocked by whatever trauma or whatever.
Absolutely. And that's exactly it. And we've got to believe in that. I mean, ultimately, maybe that was what the whole human potential kind of movement is all about, really, was believing in our own inherent internal healing ability.
Yes.
But and I believe in that because I think that's ultimately, what this is all about. It's about we're all in this together. It's a journey we're on, and that nobody has the power of healing somebody else, but we have the power of healing each other and together. Which is why psychotherapy, what brought me into psychotherapy, I think, and still would interest me in psychotherapy, is that it's the one place in my life where I feel, I'm not saying it's the only place, but one of the major places where I can be real with somebody. There's no phonyism, there's no pretension, that we can tear down the barriers, take away the facades, and just be open and honest.
It's clear that it's clear after all these decades, you're still passionate about what you do.
Isn't it fascinating? I'm here, like, I'm 65. I got into psychology at 18, and I'm learning as much now as I did back then, which is such, I mean, what a privilege.
Yes.
I learn now, and that's why, as I said to you, I mean, I've been 3 years writing this book of mine, and it contains what I consider all of the wisdom that I've tried to garner over the years, and I think I put everything into it. So it's been a passion and a journey of a privileged journey, but one that I continue to enjoy every step of the way, and still do.
So how would you say that practicing psychotherapy in Ireland might differ from other places, if it does? Or is it all the same, really?
Yeah, Ireland, we're quite unique kind of race here. We're quite on the periphery of Europe. We've had a very interesting history going back over centuries, and we carry a lot of baggage from that. But also in that we're quite modern in our ability to converse and to challenge on very important issues, which I don't hear about in other countries, where we have full public debate, because we have referendums on things like abortion, gay marriage, divorce. We have full and open and honest discussion where these types of things are trashed out. If psychotherapy is different, I don't know, is it we probably lean a lot and have learned a lot from our British colleagues. We've taken a lot from them, but I think we've an Irish, there's a kind of an honesty and a kind of some earthiness in Ireland that I don't think maybe as prevalent elsewhere. There's a kind of an earthiness, I think, about us. And I think that has got to, I think we have a spiritual dimension to us that is unique, because we didn't get as contaminated by the great scientific revolution and of the 18th and 19th century. So we've been able to maintain, we've a long tradition of mysticism and of spirituality that I think we also tap into. And so we can relate to a lot of the kind of Eastern philosophies quite well, because it taps into our own mysticism. So, you know, I think the hurt and the pain and the suffering and the trauma is no different to anywhere else in the world. I think we've something unique to offer, though, in our way of dealing with it. And I think I certainly have met, and I know I have met fabulous therapists from the States and from Europe, but there are some wonderful therapists here in Ireland. And yeah, I think that we have a compassion, and we have something that's probably unique that maybe doesn't exist elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question before you go. We have 5 more minutes. Is there any advice that you would pass along to young therapists in the field? Words of wisdom, anything?
But from what I've been saying, I suppose, and where I've culminated myself, and I didn't intend culminating in it as I wrote this book, but it culminated on all of my reflections over, and I have 11 chapters in this book, and the first 10 chapters cover every area of insight that I've developed. The final chapter is about loving. So if there's a message, the message, all I would want to give is put loving on your agenda. Do not be distracted by the scientific mind, which is fine. I'm a scientist. I've degrees the length of my arm. I've no problem with science, but don't be distracted and think that science has the answers to everything. It does not. And you know, Ken Wilber, the great Ken Wilber, has written well on this subject, on the marriage of sense and soul. We've got to understand that the soul is worth listening to. And that's where the spiritual and the loving kindness comes from.
I think that should be the title of your book. The soul is worth listening to.
Well, the title of my book is The Ego Trip.
Okay.
Oh, that's also good.
So look out for it in the bookshelves. But the ego trip,
Yes.
because we are all on this journey, and the ego is what's on the journey. It's our egos that are involved, and how we engage with our ego will determine where we're going to, and how we've got ourselves sorted or not.
So
Is your book out?
So
no, it's not out. It's
not out.
I just got clearance from publishers only this week.
Oh,
But that means it has to go through a long process of proofreading and editing, etc., etc. So it'll be at least another year before we'll see it on the bookshelves.
we'll
Maybe
be
longer.
ready.
okay, so speaking of ego, Declan and I, for those of you who are interested and want to do a little bit of travel and see Ireland, will be co-presenting for a day on what's the date? October
12th of October, Saturday, 12th of October in Dublin.
12th of October. It's going to be a day workshop. We'll both be together, and we'll be interacting like this a lot, and we'll be presenting hopefully our wisdom and what we've learned over the 80 decades combined of work in this area.
This was fantastic, and unfortunately, I have to say adieu for now.
Michael,
See you next
lovely
time.
talking
Okay.
to you.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
So this has been a delight.
True delight.
Is there anything else that you would like to add before we sign off?
Don't get me started.
We got you started.
Declan, I do have a question. Did you know or did you suspect that this discussion would go the way it went? Is that like a place that it usually goes to, or could there have been a bunch of different focuses?
I suppose I was delighted to be able to cover what we've discussed. We only touched on the issue of the ego, which is kind of probably the one area we could have spent a lot more time on. But when we talked about meaning making, that's the ego. And Robert Keegan has written an incredible book called The Evolving Self. Are you familiar with that,
No.
Jeffrey? It's about 40 years old as well.
Oh.
And that book has kind of been something that's influenced me since I did my PhD 40 years ago. So yeah, so there's a whole thing around meaning making. I think that you know, that was the Viktor Frankl kind of message in the man's search for meaning. Meaning is what it's all about. What is meaningful? There's a really important distinction between being the relevance or the role of meaning over and above that of happiness. And I think we overemphasize happiness as being our goal. Actually, making meaning is far more rewarding. So
I really like that.
So this means that if we can keep you up late another time, you should come back for a lot more to talk about. But Declan, thank you so much. It's been
my
Thank
pleasure. My pleasure. Lovely to talk to you and lovely to meet with you, Lizzie.
So good
Take
to meet
care.
you finally.
okay. Thank
Jeffrey,
you.
we'll be in touch. All right. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.